Welcome in to Cover Crimson. My name is Emily Grace McWhorter, and I join Clint Lamb every Wednesday and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Central. We're switching things up. We're going to do Wednesdays and Fridays. We mentioned that in our video on Monday, and we did a video on Monday because there was some breaking news out of Tuscaloosa. By now, you guys have all heard the news of Ryan Grubb making his way to Alabama as the new offensive coordinator. But typically, you will find me and Clint Wednesdays and Fridays. So come hang out with us, get your coffee, get whatever you're drinking in the morning, and spend your morning talking about Alabama football. Clint, how has your week been so far? Anything interesting happened so far?
Nothing interesting. It's been a good week. I feel like, I don't know, basketball is the only thing that's keeping me going right now, and there's no Bama basketball right now, so I feel lost.
Yeah.
We do have the Super Bowl on Sunday. That's something to look forward to. But I don't know. It's been a slow week, but at the same time, just time moves quick now. It feels like.
Well, the weather is a little nicer this week too, which has been incredible. I think we've both shared on here that we like the warmer weather. Well, I don't know, Clint, do you?
Do not.
No, I
No,
do.
no, no, now I think I'm just going to put a hypothesis out there. I
Okay.
think how much you enjoy certain weather is in direct proportion to your body type. So I'm a bigger guy. I love, I love the cold. I stay hot in the summer. I sweat a lot. You're kind of on the smaller side.
Yeah,
I'm sure. And so I feel like that probably has a little bit of something to do with it.
it
Because
does.
as a kid, when I was, a beanpole running around, summer was it. Now, granted, that might have had something to do with being out of school for 3 months.
For sure.
But as I've gotten older, I love the cold. I love kind of bundling up a little bit. I can always make myself warmer in my house if I want
Yeah.
to. I can't stand when you're a little bit hot and you got to leave a leg out from underneath the
Ooh,
covers or something. So
okay.
I don't know.
Yes.
It's a different approach.
Now, listen, I love some people call me crazy for this, but in the summer when you get into your car and it's like toasty warm, oh, I love that. However, in my apartment, I have to, it's 68 all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know because that's exactly where I leave mine as well.
Yeah.
Now,
Sometimes
granted,
six.
I don't leave it at 68. If it's too cold, if it'll go colder than that, let's go colder than that. Like,
Agreed.
if I got to turn the heat on, I'm going to put it on, especially at night. I put it on like 64, 65
Yes.
max, and
Yes.
then just let it sit there. Because I would actually prefer that. Now, I don't want my AC working any harder than it has to. So 68 is the lowest I'm willing to go as far as when you got to have that AC on. But I just, as cold as you can get in the house, I'm for it.
I am too. And I hate sleeping hot, like sweating.
Me too.
I don't like it. So I like to keep a very cool house. And some people are not like that at all. Like, especially the older generation, it's like 75. And I'm
Now,
like,
granted, yeah, I can remember my dad talking about staying with his buddy in Georgia. Of course, back then you would drive and you'd stay like for a week or something. There was no
yeah,
such thing as like going to spend the night or whatever.
right.
And them leaving the fans in the windows that
Mm.
would be pulling the hot air out, not even facing in. And how he'd always go and turn the fan around so he'd have something blowing on him and he'd get in trouble. It's just like I mean, I guess if that's all you were used to, that's all you know. That's all you know. But man, nowadays I couldn't go back to that way. I'll tell you
No,
that.
no. And I think if it came to like central heat and air over like a dishwasher, I think I would take central heat and air.
Oh yeah, over anything.
Over, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe
yeah,
washer and dryer though, because I really do like the washer and dryer. Like I can get
yeah.
away with like hand washing dishes, but central heating and air, I think like for us, because if you go to Europe, they don't have it, and they don't. I mean, do you remember the Olympics or the controversy about that? It was just complete obsolete. That I could not do that. Imagine you're having a train for the biggest event of your athletic career as an Olympian, and it's 81 degrees as you're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. It's I don't know. I feel like what was it? Nick Saban walked in the room at the beginning of last season for fall camp, and he said something about the media not looking tough or being soft.
Yeah.
He turned to Josh and said, "Did they look soft to you?" Because they had been outside in the heat for 2+ hours, and everybody else was sitting
Like
in the AC. But
frigid.
hey, call me soft if you want to. I like being cool. Now, if I'm outside and stuff, and I'm in an environment where I'm supposed to sweat, I don't mind sweating. I just
Right.
don't
Right.
want sitting in my house where I should be comfortable. You know,
Right. I think the hottest game, and this might be a hot take, this past season for Alabama, that South Carolina game was like sneaky warm, and it was an early kick. And I remember sitting down on the field, and we weren't at that game together, but it got so hot so quickly. And like, I feel like when you're prepared for the heat mentally, you're just a little better off. But we kind of worn, like, I think I wore like pants that game, or maybe like a long skirt. And I had a moment of like, oh my gosh, like I'm about to pass out. Oh my gosh, Chris says we never had a car with air conditioning until the late 90s.
That's what my dad said too. And he lived out in Texas for, I think, just over a year, and getting stuck in traffic and stuff. And it was just no AC, and you'd have to, it's like and granted, this is not acceptable now, even close, but they'd be riding around with a truck, bed full of beer and a cooler. And it's like, if you got stranded on the side of the road, or not on the, but in traffic or whatever, you just get out of your car, throw the tailgate down and start sipping on some beers because it was that hot. I mean, so just, I can't even imagine living in that kind of world. I feel like so much has changed. So much has changed in the college football world in the last. Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect representation. I mean, imagine going back 10 years and telling people what college football would look like today. I wouldn't have believed you. I'd be like, there's no way.
There's no way that you could have come up with this, and all of the things that have transpired, been like, oh yeah, that'll happen. Speaking of this actually brings up a great point to start off the show. Have you seen this new Georgia tax break being introduced called the Kirby Smart bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you find it interesting that it's literally called the Kirby Smart tax bill?
Okay, as a Georgia Southern grad, I'm like, let's just like pump the brakes on that a little bit.
I think people get upset about this stuff, right? I mean, we're all football fans here, so from our perspective, I feel like is an Alabama fan okay with Georgia doing this to give themselves an advantage, or I guess even the playing field against certain states?
Yeah,
probably not. Like, they don't want Georgia to have that advantage. But when it comes to Alabama, if Alabama were to do the same thing, I feel like your diehard fans would be like, absolutely, let's do this. It'll make us more competitive. There's also people that's like, man, these guys are already getting paid pretty handsomely. They weren't getting paid just a couple of years ago. So it's like, not only are you getting this newfound money, but now you get to be special, and everybody else goes to a 9-to-5 and works, and they get taxed and you don't. I'm not saying that's how you should look at it. I'm saying I just specifically naming it the Kirby Smart tax bill, which I don't know if that's the official name or if that's just a label they've given it.
It's a moniker that they've given it, but I want to explain a little bit for those that are tuning in that may not have heard about this. So I am from the great state of Georgia, and I went to Georgia Southern. And so I found this, coming across my news feed, but a few senators have proposed this bill. And one of the senators said, listen, recruiting is a very, very competitive sport. When you're recruiting these 5-star athletes, they all have agents, and we're competing with Tennessee, Texas, and Florida, who they don't have state income tax, but Georgia does. It's at around 5%. Eventually we'll get there and we won't have a state income tax. I hope that happens. But until then, we've got to get Kirby and these football coaches and basketball coaches, these coaches, a tool in their toolbox to be able to compete. He did say he's actually not talked to Smart about the bill, but said the idea came after a dinner he had. Oh, I did not know this. But he said the idea came after a dinner he had with former Alabama coach Nick Saban and others at a home on Lake Burton, where Saban has a lake house. Did you see that part?
No, I did not see that part.
Breaking news.
That is interesting. Look, I don't know how much of a difference this will make, to be honest with you. I don't know how much. What I will say is it's something to pitch. And a lot of people, like, I worked in selling manufactured homes. It was my first job when I got out of college. And what I learned was, when you sell, you feature benefit. You get the feature and then you get the benefit of it. And we were kind of taught there are features that every home comes with. It is standard. It has to have it. But if the competitor's not pitching it, then it's a benefit. It's a feature and it's a benefit. Like, I think the example was like in the bathroom, they have those plugs where if you accidentally drop your blow dryer into the sink that's filled with water, like, it'll automatically turn it off. And it's like, for safety precautions, like, I think that's like pretty standard in every house. But if other people don't think to pitch that, and you're like, hey, we got this really neat, cool thing here, protect you, protect your kids. And it's like, wow. And it's like, they're getting the same things. So my point is that this is a feature that you'll be able to pitch and say, hey, not only, if you come to us, you'll get to save extra money that you can't save anywhere else. And it doesn't matter how much that is. And in the grand scheme of things, how much that matters. It might be $5,000 or something.
Right.
A guy that's making 200 grand, like I'm, which it wouldn't be that, but my point is that I think it's a selling point that if sold correctly can be beneficial. But if you're actually looking and crunching the numbers, I don't know how much of a difference it actually makes.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and I'm curious how far this goes, but I want to add this because the senator said that Saban told him Missouri passed an NIL law after losing recruits to schools like Texas and Texas A&M that didn't pay state income tax. So that right there is an indicator that apparently some of these parents / family members or people that are involved in these athletes' lives are taking this into consideration. So the Missouri NIL bill approved in 2023 allows in-state athletes to make money from endorsement deals in high school if they sign with public universities in that state. That to me makes a lot more sense and probably have a lot more money coming in compared to the state income tax exemption, essentially what the athletes would receive.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's everybody's trying to do whatever they can to give themselves a competitive advantage. And I mean, name the recruits is what I want to know. I don't think it had anything to do with they didn't have to pay state income tax, going there, so that's where they went. I think it was the fact that they just gave them a fatter check because it's Texas and Texas A&M. So it's like, I mean, I don't know if that specific example is actually true, or it's like, hey, this would help us. It would be more money that we can put in kids' pockets. So, we would just tell people that it's already a problem, it's already happened, and they might be more willing to come up with a solution.
And I think that's the angle that they're taking. I'm curious of those watching, how do you guys feel about this? Are you in support of this? If this were to come to the state of Alabama, how would you guys feel? But the official name is Bill 71. And the
Kirby Smart tax bill sounds way better.
Right. I agree. If I see that on like the little voting screen, Kirby Smart bill, what is that? Click.
Anything that helps Kirby.
And, honestly, for me too, like coming from Georgia Southern, group of 5, they have always had to compete with the University of Georgia in a lot of ways, specifically with recruiting and Georgia Tech. And for Georgia Southern, just geographically, they also pull a lot of Florida kids because we're on that line. But I think things like this help the Georgia Southerns. And I say that because, for a Georgia Southern NIL athlete, they may not be making, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're making $50,000 off an endorsement deal. And that's a lot of money. So if there's a way to put a couple extra $1,000s in their pocket, I'm in support of that. I don't have an issue. But Clint, you make a good point that some people still have not gotten on board with the pay the players. I'm in the camp, and I don't know about you. I'm going to assume yes, and we can have this conversation. And I'd love the chat to get involved in this. I think that college players should be paid for their sport. Full stop. I think that there are some things that need to be changed, and we've talked about it, over the last couple of months in terms of the transfer portal and what it looks like, and players saying, hey, I need a blank check to play in this bowl game. That's not okay. But I do think that these athletes need to get paid, and if there's a way to help them be even more financially literate, financially stable after college based on what they do in college, and a bill like this can help them, I support it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always supported players getting paid. How they're getting paid right now is what I don't agree with. Arch Manning, a lot of people will be like, hey, you're only getting these endorsement deals because of your last name. And that's 100% true. He's a very talented kid. Mm-hmm. But if he had, any other last name, being the quarterback at Texas, even if he hasn't had, he has had a couple of starts actually, but even if he hasn't had like a full season and hadn't established himself yet as one of the premier quarterbacks in college football, the second you get elevated to kind of the starting position at a program like Texas and that brand, and especially if you were like a former 5-star and the expectations are high, you're going to already start to see money pour in the correct way. But Manning having his last name certainly elevates that to a completely different level. I don't dispute that at all, but that's the way it was supposed to. Like, he's doing that Red Bull thing right now.
Yeah.
First of all, I find it interesting how he didn't do any of this stuff, even though I know that there were opportunities there for him before he became the starter. And he rejected those. He wanted to focus on football, focus on getting better. Now that he is the starter, he's willing to do some of that stuff. I think because the Manning family doesn't have to worry about money. So that helps. I mean, I think they're in a very unique position compared to a lot of the. So I'm not saying he's incredible for handling it this way, but now that he is the starter and he's being recognized as that, him, going out there and getting like another brand to say, hey, the Texas brand is huge. The Manning brand is huge. Mm-hmm. We're willing to give you money to endorse our products, whether that be through social media posts or commercials or little short clips or videos or whatever. that is how NIL was supposed to work. That is what I am in full support of, and I've always been in full support of.
Okay.
What I don't agree with is just paying a player, and it's like, we don't even know what you're going to do. We'll figure all that out later. This is the money we're going to give you, though. That's not how it's supposed to operate.
So you're more in the stance of brand endorsement, brand deals over salary type.
Now, once it gets passed and salaries are like allowed, and it's revenue sharing, which, they are the athletes have a huge part in the revenue that's being generated. So revenue sharing, like, that makes sense to me. I'm just saying the current model where it's supposed to be NIL, name, image, and likeness, and it's nothing but pay for play mask through some of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation. And in my opinion, when you get bills like these and you get this kind of stir of conversation around it, to me, it's only going to make things a little clearer too, like as this continues to progress. Because I think one thing that is a little, I don't want to say intimidating, but a little iffy is that you're going to have a lot of these players that they are making an influx of money at such a young age. And obviously the hope and prayer is that they have someone in their life to help manage that. And I know that Alabama has been one of the programs that have stepped in and kind of filled that gap of providing financial literacy and making sure that, I mean, even things like paying your taxes, there's going to be, and you guys can quote me on this, in 5-6 years, you're going to have athletes that have, unfortunately, some tax evasion because they made $60K off of one deal and they didn't do a W-9 for it or a W-2, whatever. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's what you're risking when you get into this territory of there's a lot of money, some zeros attached to it, and there's no really, I don't want to say regulation, but there's no knowledge of how to handle that. So a bill like this, some athletes may not even realize that they're paying state income tax on their NIL in the state of Georgia. This is a way to learn about that, to say, okay, as a high schooler, that's important to me. I didn't realize that was a factor. I'm going to look at Texas, Tennessee, Florida. Oh, but now listen, my home state has this. Maybe I get to stay closer to home, etc. So I don't know. Let us know what you guys think in the chat. We have someone saying, I like it. It's another tool in the toolbox. Agreed. Roll Tide, guys. Love y'all show. Watch every week. Thank you, Timothy. We appreciate that.
Very much. Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it plays out. It's new. Everybody's trying to learn how to navigate some of this stuff, but it's reached a point of absurdity. But what is also absurd is some of these win totals that has been put out.
Good transition, Clint. I love that.
Which we will be pulling up here in just a second. First of all, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I think Alabama's was 9.5.
It was, for sure.
So they finished under. And at the time, it's like with the talent, the fact that Kalen DeBoer is going to be coming in, he's a top 10 football coach in college football, like that felt pretty safe. Mm-hmm. But then they fell short of that. This year, and we'll start off with Alabama's just because that's the big talking point. Okay. We'll expand it out and talk about some of these others. But they're sitting at 8.5. And we'll go ahead and.
What was your immediate kind of reaction to that? I'm curious.
How?
When you saw that, what was your first thought? Were you like, oh, you have it pulled up. Perfect.
How was my thought?
Like, how? Oh, how?
Yeah. What? Like, how did you reach 8? Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't make that clear. Yeah, that's exactly where I was at, because it doesn't make, now granted, we'll be pulling up the schedule and we'll be talking about it. I got it sitting right here in front of me. But first of all, one of the most important additions in this entire offseason is going to have been Ryan Grubb. When you talk about player, coach, whatever, that is going to be absolutely massive. I don't think there's as much of a transition period because the coaching staff is already really comfortable with him. So if it was like a new, like innovative play caller, but you had never worked with him and stuff before, it's like everybody's trying to establish relationships with him and figuring out how they're going to operate and navigate together. It would make sense to me at that point to say, okay, there will be some sort of transition, but I think it's going to be very flawless. You've got one quarterback in this competition who's already played under him. You got, Jimmy Bernard, who can explain to the receivers how he operates. You got Parker Brailsford, who can explain to the offensive linemen how he operates. You got Josh Cuevas, who can explain to the tight ends how he operates. So it's like, pretty much every position group on the offense, except for quarterback, is going to have a player who can kind of be like, hey, this is the rundown on Ryan Grubb. This is how, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to look out for. So I think that's going to be pretty easy. I really do feel like the transitional period last year was really tough on the staff and the program, and I just don't think that's going to be a problem in year 2.
I agree, and I want to go through Alabama's schedule, and all I want you to do, Clint, is give me win-loss, okay? I'm going to name the game. You say win-loss, and we'll see what your total is at the end of this. And guys in the chat, play along with us, but I think this will kind of paint a picture of where Alabama is at, and I would agree with you, Clint. It's considering what home games are on the schedule, it's interesting. We had a mention of that in the chat. But first game, Florida State at Florida State.
Going to be tougher than people think, but it's a win.
Okay. ULM at home.
Win.
Wisconsin at home.
Win.
Georgia in Athens.
Go ahead and put that as a loss.
Okay. Vanderbilt at home.
Win.
Missouri at Missouri.
Will be tough, but win.
Tennessee at home.
Win.
South Carolina in Columbia.
Will be tough. I'll say win, though.
Okay. LSU at home.
That being at home, win. Man, I don't like where this is going, though. I really don't.
Oklahoma at home.
Win.
Eastern Illinois at home.
Loss. Just kidding. Win. Definitely a win.
And then Auburn at Auburn.
That's going to be the other big one where it's like that could be. People don't want to admit it. I'm not saying it's going to be a loss for Alabama necessarily, but like you got what I like to call toss-up games. And there were some more that I went one way or the other.
Yeah.
This is like the biggest toss-up game in my opinion. Georgia's also a toss-up. I think they got some question marks, and we don't know how exactly they're going to look. So Alabama could go into Athens and get a win there. So, but you know what? When you have Alabama's talent, you can go anywhere and win. Mm-hmm. And in these big games, Alabama's done quite well. But the number one thing for me, and this is what's going to make the difference, I think 9-3 is kind of the floor.
Yep.
Again, and I think that 10-2 is kind of the ceiling, in my opinion.
Where would you put
maybe 11?
3 losses? Where would you pin those other 2 losses? So Georgia, would you put it? Would you give a home loss potentially
to Georgia?
No. I'm saying where would you find if Bama goes 9-3?
Here's the thing. This is what concerns me. You go through this schedule. Mm-hmm. Tennessee at home will be tough.
Yeah.
Going on the road to South Carolina, going on the road to Missouri, technically going on the road to Tallahassee. Going on the road to Auburn, you got LSU at home. Like I can see a second loss in there somewhere for sure.
Yep.
And I say for sure, like I'm feel pretty confident in that. And then where I think 9-3 becomes the floor is no one thought they were going to lose to Oklahoma. No one thought they were going to lose to Vanderbilt, and yet they lost. And this has been a Kalen DeBoer problem. The difference is at Washington, especially in year 2 when he went undefeated, is you had these letdown games, but the talent gap was so big between Washington and some of these other Pac-12 teams at the time that they were still able to get a win. In the SEC, that doesn't happen. I mean, when you go into Norman, I don't care how rough things have looked for Oklahoma. They've got talent. They've got a good coaching staff. It's a hostile environment. You can lose that football game. And so why I say 9-3 is before you never included games you shouldn't lose with Nick Saban. You never did. It was because it didn't happen.
Right.
So,
right.
But with Kalen DeBoer and just how he's operating, the fact that you can lose some of these games, I think the ceiling's actually 11-1. I said 10-2. I just said this exact same thing last year. I could see 11-1. 10-2 felt like the sweet spot. 9-3 felt like the floor. I feel the exact same way this year. And the only reason that I'm getting it down to 3 is if you drop a game that you're not supposed to. And I don't know if that exists on the schedule.
Yeah, no, and I think you're exactly right. I think that when you look back at last season, I think that, there wasn't the expectations would have been, like you said, the floor was 9-3, except it was the games that Alabama lost that were so painful. It was Vanderbilt. It was OU. And that right there was the crux of it. I think people had LSU as one of those games. It was at Death Valley. That was going to be a letdown game. That was one of the best games that the defense put together. And then obviously Jalen Milroe.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Georgia, even with it being in Tuscaloosa, a lot of people feel like Georgia's #1 team. So
that was it. It felt like a baked in kind of lost into the schedule. Again, we're talking about a year ago, what people were saying, especially in Kalen DeBoer's first year, but it wasn't those games that got him. It was OU and Vanderbilt. I mean, even Tennessee on the road.
Understandable.
Understandable. We talked a lot about that game too. And how Jalen Milroe performed in that game. And there was some nuances there, but I'm going to have to agree with you that you can't guarantee any wins with where Alabama is at coming off of last season. Now, we could be talking about this in a year after a really successful season, and we could completely change our tune. But based on what we observed last season with both of our own eyes, it's a hard press to cruise through the schedule and be like, oh, yeah. I mean, you should win. You should win at South Carolina, but look what they did in Tuscaloosa.
100%. And I think they got question marks. Like, everybody kind of hyping them up. I've seen people putting them in the college football playoff. When you lose what they lost up front defensively, your two interior guys, Kyle Kennard, he was 11.5 sacks in the SEC. I think three of their top four guys on their defensive front, two interior guys, and then one edge combined for 19.5 sacks and over 100 pressures last year. They lose that. Their offensive line was terrible, but they lose a lot of the experience along their offensive line. A lot of people say, well, they should only go up from here. It's new players, but it should be better still. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because there's nobody I'm pointing to or that anybody can point and say this is going to be our 5 guys and this all looks a lot better on paper. It's a question mark. Lenore Sellers, we've seen this with other quarterbacks. When you go from being a first-year starter, you kind of take people by surprise. They don't know what to expect. You have a phenomenal season. You've got to learn to win in different ways the following year, because they've got an entire offseason of tape to watch you. And they're going to figure out where to press you, what can kind of give you some issues. If you don't learn how to counter that and win in other ways, you're not going to be as successful. So, I look at like South Carolina and I say, well, I think it's very possible that they're not nearly as good as they were last year. But at the same time, that is the type of game that Alabama would really struggle with going to their place. Yeah. They should be good, or at least good enough. I mean, Missouri is a game. It's like, you can't go through the schedule. And even with what Missouri lost, Luther Burden, Brady Cook, they've been able to do a lot in the transfer portal, but I'm not going to sit here and say Alabama's going on the road there and losing that game. But at the same time, that is a game that they're capable of losing based off of, what we saw in 2024. I just wonder if one of the big issues in those games was Jalen Milroe really struggling. Now, why he was struggling, was that more of it goes beyond that? We'll find out soon enough. I wouldn't say soon enough, but we'll find out at some point. But I do feel like if you've got more stability and consistency there, a lot of these issues probably don't happen. And I'm expecting more stability and consistency there. So that is why I think maybe you won't see that as much, but I can't say that definitively.
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about that, what you just said, but also how last year's offense was so dependent on the quarterback position. It was all on Jalen, and I don't foresee that going forward with this quarterback battle that will take place with Ryan Grubb. And I'm intrigued to see these, I don't want to say, smaller games, but these games that have a little more edge to them that might sneak up on Alabama. Because it felt like, too, what I saw, one of the biggest issues was in-game adjustments and how they were executed and how they were able to be capitalized on. And it was after the Oklahoma game. And one of my questions to Coach DeBoer and Coach Sheridan was about those in-game adjustments. How did they feel like those translate on the field? And that was an area, along with, third down, they could knock it off the field on third down, that remained present all season long. Those are two things, specifically those in-game adjustments, that I'm looking for this coming season to see, okay, if, South Carolina has it figured out, how can Alabama adapt? And like you said, when it comes to quarterback, but win in a different way, or have a game plan that, they go down the list of plan B, plan C, plan D, as Coach Sheridan put it, because I felt like that was severely lacking in games like Vanderbilt, OU, Tennessee.
what I want people to understand, and I'm just speaking my truth and how I understand things. I'm not trying to take shots at anybody. I know that it comes off like I probably am sometimes. You have to understand, if imagine getting to halftime of some of these games and it's like, man, what X opponent is presenting us, we can take advantage of it this way. But you look at the limitations of your quarterback and you say, we can't take advantage of that. He's not, that's not a place that he's comfortable in. It's not a place that he's effective in. So while they are presenting these opportunities, we don't have the ability to exploit that. That is something that I think, obviously you do certain things against this Alabama offense. And if you could do that effectively in 2024, you could stop or slow down Alabama's offense.
Yeah.
That it was, and they didn't have the ability to counterpunch. Everybody wants to put it on like Nick Sheridan and a lack of adjustments, but it's like, how much of that was him being handcuffed? I'm not saying that I'm definitively sure that that was a problem. What I am saying is that could have been a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that with, whoever ends up starting at quarterback, there's three, in my opinion, good options. I think, there's percentages as far as who ends up being the starter, but I think they all have a chance to be that guy. It doesn't matter who that ends up being. I think they will be more, consistent or have more of that ability in 2025 than 2024.
Well, Clint, that's a great point. And honestly, you have shifted my perspective on that, because I truthfully didn't really even consider how, potentially limited those offensive adjustments were. And I think an example of that is second half of Georgia. Once Georgia caught on, it was
little counter punches from Bama.
Yes. So that's a really, really interesting point to look for. When I say I'm going to be looking for those offensive adjustments, what that looks like, I think we're going to see a different picture simply because who's at quarterback. So I really like that point. And it's a great perspective, shift as well, to remind everyone kind of the reality of what Alabama might have been dealing with this time last year with their quarterback.
Well, and there's, so look at the potential problems. The offensive line was a potential problem.
Yeah.
But you feel like you've got some solutions there. We got to see that play out. That's still probably the biggest question mark. But let's say it was a Jalen Milroe problem. That problem has now been eliminated. Let's say it was a play caller's problem. That problem has now been eliminated. So it's like most of the things that it could have been have been resolved or tackled in some way. And so you would expect that to improve. But for whatever reason, you're 100% right. And I can't tell you exactly, or definitively what the problem was, but it was a problem. There's no doubt about that. We didn't see enough counter punches being made. I think at times there were certain games that kind of got out of control, where defensively, some of the lack of adjustments from Kane Womack, that was more of game script. But from an offensive perspective, and I guess, in some ways that also applied to the offense. That's another factor here, where it was like, okay, you end up getting down multiple scores early against Vanderbilt. Forget your game plan completely shifts. Anything you planned or how you plan to attack that game was different. Some of the issues that you had in other areas, in other games where you get down, against Michigan, same kind of thing. Like, how do you expect them to adjust? They had a game plan going in, they get down by quite a bit and they're trying to fight, claw and scratch to come back. It's like adjustments can be made, but the defense in those situations, they know a lot of what you're going to be doing to adjust. They know it's going to be a pass heavy, pass first type of mentality. You're going to have to get away from really what Alabama's identity was. So it's like there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I think a lot of your issues will be resolved.
Yeah, let's look at the other graphic when it comes to coaches, and let's briefly talk about Coach DeBoer and where he sits on that list. And this is from On3. They do a great job of putting these things together, so then we on the back end can kind of break those down.
Yeah, they're pulling it up now.
With the Grubb hire, which I think is a good move, and Sheridan staying on staff, will Grubb hire hurt our NIL? Interesting question, Brian. Clint, what are your thoughts?
With Grubb hire, which I think is a good move, and Sheridan's hurt our NIL. Brian, can you elaborate just a little bit on that? Because I don't know how you mean like it potentially hurt the NIL. You could be making a great point there.
All right, let's look at this graphic real quick. So this is the top 25 college football coaches, and Coach DeBoer is sitting at number 9. Does this surprise you with what the win total is?
I think this is still, this is Ari Wasserman with On3. I know that a lot of Alabama fans don't like some of what he does. I don't always agree with him, that's for sure. And I've kind of been vocal about that on Twitter when I haven't. But I think based off of what we saw, a lot of people are going to question, okay, Deion Sanders, he did a good job of really turning that program around. Sustainable. It's got to be sustainable. Like there's a lot of, we haven't seen Deion Sanders without Shador.
No,
or Travis Hunter. So granted, he's done a good job recruiting. You expect that to continue, but you don't know if Juju Lewis is going to pan out. They added another quarterback, the quarterback out of the transfer portal that's pretty highly known. I don't know why I'm drawing. The kid from Liberty, Caden Salter.
Yep.
So they add him. So you would expect, okay, short term, long term. That I feel like they'll be fun. But it's like, okay, you need to see some sort of sustainable success from him. Kyle Whittingham done some good things. I don't know. What I will say is Kalen DeBoer has played 4 of the 8 head coaches listed ahead of him here, and he's 7-0 in those games. So, granted, you lose to Josh Heupel, you lose to Sharon Moore in the bowl game, you lose to Brent Venables, who's on this list, who didn't have a great Oklahoma team, finished under 500 if I'm not mistaken. So that's where really you can't just look at what he's done against the guys ahead of him. But what I will say is that this is kind of a perfect representation of Kalen DeBoer. Or at least Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, where it's like when it's the best against the best, maybe you should be less worried about going to Athens and more worried about going to like Missouri.
I full stop 100% agree with you, Clint. That is, yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that that's an interesting, angle to all of this. And AK brings up good points. He says, I just don't get what the criteria is for that list. He has a winning record. He has winning records over several coaches in front of him. He's gone farther than most of the coaches ahead of him. And again, these lists are, I'm not sure what his criteria is based on how he puts these together. 7-0 speaks for itself, truthfully, when it comes to those records. But
it should get you ahead of Deion.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least. And Kyle Whittingham. I think if he would have checked in at like number 7, Dabo's got the national championships. He doesn't have the NIL backing. Now, some of that's been his problem. But he also hadn't really, it's not like Clemson's rolling around with the money. Marcus Freeman. I mean, people forget Kalen DeBoer is a year removed from a national title appearance.
Yeah.
A lot of developed talent. A lot of people want to give, previous coaching staff credit for some of that. I mean, he brought Michael Penix to Washington.
Yes.
He developed the talent, and where they ended up, where they're at today, they will tell you 100% that is a Kalen DeBoer credit. So I think we kind of are prisoners of the moment at times, but I would feel if he was in the top 7, I'd be fine with it. 9 to me seems too low.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And the more you kind of look over that list, it's interesting. And I'd love to hear Ari how he, slots those coaches. Kirby Smart at 1. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of national championships, only, I guess now 2 years removed. I guess the dynasty's over, according to the way that we held Nick Saban to that standard. We should be talking about what happened to Kirby Smart. I mean, are we a year away with Georgia and Kirby from him being Dabo Swinney and him needing to be number 6 or 7 on this list?
Well,
Dabo had a really solid run there. I mean, and granted, he was in like every national championship. He just wasn't winning them all. He was splitting with the greatest college football coach of all time, making the playoffs how many years in a row? I mean, Georgia, if they go 3 years without winning one, I don't think that's a big deal. But based off of kind of the standard in which we held Dabo to, the fact that any time felt like Nick Saban would go 1 year without winning, we'd be talking about the dynasty being over. Yeah. So, a couple of years, not making the playoffs, the year before last, and then this year, the way that they lost to Notre Dame, kind of getting, I don't know. I mean, are we 1 more year away from needing to have that conversation, or is it a couple of years?
But I mean, Clint, I look at the regular season for Georgia, and there are a lot of, bailouts. I mean, you look at the Georgia Tech game.
Yeah. I mean, that it was targeting. I'm sorry. That's and I've gone back and forth with people. And granted, I mean, everybody gets fortunate on those calls sometimes.
Yes.
Everybody. And Bama's been fortunate on some of those calls. That happens. There's nothing there where it's like, okay, Georgia did what they needed to do to take advantage of an opportunity. But you're right. I mean, they were that loss away from not going to the college football playoff twice in a row, 2 years in a row.
Right. So I think that to me, it's not even like the playoff discussion about what they did when they got there, even with the extended playoff format. It's more about the regular season and how I felt. What would you say Georgia's best win was?
Ooh, let's actually pull up Georgia's schedule because let's see, where do I got? I got Bama's right here, so I can pull up Georgia's. I want to go. I mean, because you're right. I mean, it wasn't just the Georgia Tech game, Kentucky too.
Yeah,
Kentucky was one of those where it's like they probably shouldn't have won that game. They got blown out by Ole Miss.
Blown out. I think that was Ole Miss's easy best win, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the 2 wins over Texas is going to be viewed as solid.
But even then, though, that the first game was touch and go.
Well, the first game they did go to Austin and won pretty handedly.
Yes.
The second one was the one. Yeah, it was. Second one was the overtime where it's like,
yes,
I thought Georgia's going to blow this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the double-digit win at home against Tennessee, who I just don't think, Tennessee beat Alabama. Texas was a team that I just don't think they were as impressive as people kind of made them out to be, which kind of makes Alabama look worse too. But 34-3 against Clemson. I don't know. Clemson lost 4 games.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, I would probably say their most impressive win was going on the road to Austin and beating Texas by 15 points.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of like, you didn't see Nick Saban. I mean, tell me a time in the regular season. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Even when things started to name a time in the regular season, got beat by 3 scores. Got beat by 3 scores against Clemson in the national title. Got beat by 10 at home against Texas, but like 18 points to Ole Miss.
That's
and it's a road game, man. It's a tough one in the SEC, but there's like signs where it's like, man, we held Saban to this standard. Why can't we hold Kirby the same thing?
Yeah, and so I think that discussion, in my opinion, is almost already there after this past season. There was a lot of Carson Beck disdain from Georgia fans, and a lot of discussion. But I'm curious. I felt like too, Georgia's run game wasn't. I mean, they had the yips too.
Which Bama fans know a little something about the yips.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that I'm kind of looking at this next season as a get right year for Georgia in a lot of ways to kind of see, can they revert back to what, the 20, I guess, when did they first make was it 2018 that they made their first appearance or 2017?
2017.
2017.
Yeah, 2017.
They won the SEC championship?
Wait, Georgia,
they played Auburn. No, they lost to Auburn.
Auburn. They played Bama in the national title, and Bama won in overtime.
Yes. So I want to see, can Georgia get back to that elite level of play? I don't think that they've had any, insane running backs either. And that was something that Georgia really, like in the 2010s, really prided themselves in, was that their run game, like Nick Chubb, Michelle. And they've
offensive line wasn't as dominant this year, not even close.
The defense wasn't, insane. The corner,
vulnerable. And granted, Bama's dealing with the same things. Like, you don't look at Bama and like they've struggled to run the football. Their offensive line has been suspect compared to, recent years. Their defense has not been the same, as far as the elite level play, the consistent play. Like, I'm just saying everybody's holding Kalen DeBoer, and I understand the results, but if a couple things don't bounce Kirby Smart's way, which Nick Saban found some ways to win some of these games too. But if they don't, we're having this same conversation. Like, Georgia would have lost. All they would have had to have done was lose to Georgia Tech, which they probably should have. And they're a 3-loss, 9-3, regular season team too.
Yeah.
And yet we're talking about, Bama and Kalen DeBoer, like they're done, but no one's sounding any sort of alarms with Georgia because they made the playoff, because they won, beat Texas. But I don't know. I don't think it's as big of a gap as kind of some people are making it out to be right now.
No, I would agree. And I think too, do you think if Georgia had lost to Tech in Athens, that would have been a worse loss than Alabama losing to OU on the road?
Ooh, that is a good question.
From a media standpoint. And if you guys
now, and they were beating them pretty good. I mean, like if it would have finished that way,
Yeah.
Now, granted, if they would have closed and then Georgia Tech pulled it out, maybe we would have had that conversation. But there for a while, they were kicking the mess out of Georgia.
Yeah.
They were the more physical football team. I couldn't believe what I was watching. You know what? I can't honestly answer that question because I feel like the way Alabama lost with everything on the line like that, but Georgia would have had a ton on the line too. I mean, they don't go to the playoff if they lose that game.
No.
I say that they would have, which they did beat Texas, but it was like they would have been Clemson at that point, where it's like, yeah, you won the SEC, but you lost 3 regular season games. You really shouldn't deserve to be there, whatever. That is, EG, that's a good one. I don't know. I can't decide.
I think my back and forth is that was in Athens.
It was in Athens. And people, it being Kalen DeBoer's first year, him not being Kirby Smart or Nick Saban, people aren't necessarily shocked that something like that would happen to him. You never felt like that was ever going to happen to Nick Saban, and you really don't feel like that's going to happen to Kirby Smart. Kirby has always pulled out some close games. I remember a few years ago, Missouri, and after the game, him talking about how tough it is to play on the road in the SEC because Missouri wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And he's right. That is 100% correct. I'll defend him on that. But, that's
think about it.
Georgia Tech would be flying high right now, too.
Oh, for sure.
You wouldn't be able to tell them nothing because they already had a really good year. Beating Florida State in the opener. I almost said Notre Dame because they played in Ireland. That's the whole reason I got those two confused. Beat Florida State in the opener, beat Georgia to close out. I mean, I don't know.
Successful. Let's keep talking about Georgia, and I want to go back to the first graphic of what their total is. And I want to go through their schedule as well. And let's just run through this.
All right, so they're 9.5.
9.5, and so they play Marshall at home.
Yep.
They play Austin P at home. They play Tennessee in Knoxville. They play Alabama
after a bye week.
At home, yep, after a bye week. Alabama. They've got Kentucky at home. They've got Auburn at Auburn. They've got Ole Miss at home. They've got Florida, obviously, in Jacksonville. They've got Mississippi State at Mississippi State. They've got Texas at home. They've got Charlotte at home. And then they go down the road to Atlanta to play Tech.
Oh.
That's not an easy schedule. I mean, that's a stretch. And I wanna talk about Florida after this because we need to break down Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, we do.
6.5 is interesting.
That 6.5. Yeah, you're 100% correct.
Yeah. So what are our initial thoughts on that?
It's a tough schedule. I mean, you're going on the road to Knoxville. You're going to Auburn. Mm-hmm. You do get Bama at home, but Bama at home. I mean, you're glad when you get that game between two really good programs at home, but it's a losable game at home, just like it's
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that's more of a. I'm going to give the lean to Georgia there because of that home field.
Yeah.
But Ole Miss, I think they're probably going to take a step back. You do get them at home, so I'd expect that to be a win. But it's a tough game, and it's sandwiched between a road. You go on the road to Auburn. Very next week you play Ole Miss, and the very next week you're playing at a neutral site against Florida, who I expect to be a whole lot better.
Me too.
Just that, and that's after. I mean, Kentucky's going to be physical. Alabama, and they've got a stretch. I mean. Yeah. They do get a bye week before Bama, but then it's Bama, Kentucky, Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida. I think that's in the SEC. That's a tough gauntlet. I'd be shocked if they didn't drop at least one game out of there, if not two.
Yeah, and then you also have Texas at home.
Yeah, which to me that's another one that's kind of like Bama, where it's like, okay, you get it at home, that's good. I mean, you get Texas and Bama now at home after having to play them away in 2024, and that's a huge advantage. You can't just automatically chalk either one of those up to a win.
No.
But you look and you say, okay, I say they, when you talk about that 3-game stretch, Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida, I think out of those 3 games, they probably drop one. Mm-hmm. I think either Texas or Alabama wouldn't be shocked if they split there. Yeah. That's really the only 2 I'm seeing, though.
Okay.
Now, granted, if you lost to both Texas and Alabama because you're not as good, that there's possibly your 3 unless you can get through that 3-game stretch unscathed. But I would say 10-2 for me.
Okay. And I also think Auburn is not on this. And I'm a little curious about that too, because there's a lot of high expectations for Auburn.
There is. I mean, some people are thinking they're going to finish, or be like top 15, top 10. Yeah. Let's see if there's any.
Let me see. I mean, I guess it was 2 years ago or 2 seasons ago that Georgia went to Auburn, and that was a super close game. I covered that game, and that was touch and go. And Auburn will benefit from having both Georgia and Bama injured and here.
Yeah, I mean, and Auburn. So, like, you look at their schedule. Baylor, yeah, on the road.
I want to see Club Auburn's.
Oklahoma on the road, Texas A&M on the road, Georgia was. That's actually not a. There's like some almost guaranteed losses on there, but it's. I don't know that I'm necessarily seeing like a ton.
No, I mean, you start off. I mean, hypothetically, I mean, obviously you're going to OU, but you got Baylor, Ball State, South Alabama, Oklahoma.
I think Georgia you lose.
Yeah.
I think Bama you probably lose. Now, granted, I mean, getting both those two at home, if they're as good as people think they're going to be or as improved, you can win both those games. Going on the road to College Station, you probably lose that.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be tough. I don't know.
I feel like no one's really kind of talking about that. I felt like there's a lot of expectations, but the schedule hasn't really been broken down from what I've seen. But now that I'm looking at it,
I mean, I think if you don't go 7-5 at least with this, I mean, this really, you look at the schedule. So at Baylor, Ball State at home, South Alabama at home, at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, Georgia home, Missouri home, at Arkansas on the road, Kentucky at home, at Vanderbilt, Mercer at home, Alabama at home. Like, just looking at that, unless you continue to have a lot of the same problems where it's like they were probably better than their record showed this past year.
I fully agree. I think that the biggest issue, in my opinion, again, covering Auburn as well as Alabama, was Hugh Freeze's ability to lose games for his team. I mean,
it was, yeah. And then if you get more of that, anything can happen. But
yeah,
I mean, I wonder from an Auburn fan's perspective, like, what helps Hugh keep his job? Like, what does that record got to be? Because I mean, there's no way, and I would be just flabbergasted if they don't go at least 7-5. 8-4, I feel like is probably what you're looking at for them.
Do you think that Hugh Freeze or Brian Kelly is on a hotter seat?
Brian Kelly's got to get to 9 wins to hit the over. I think it was right there. 8.5. And granted, they're regressing. I mean, it's like they're not taking steps forward. They're missing the playoffs. I think everybody thought, okay, going to 12 teams, LSU is going to be one of those that's in there. You're getting Garrett Nussmeier back, so there's going to be some expectations. Aaron Anderson, I would, and the whole thing with Brooks, Greg Brooks. Did you see this? No. I think he found out. Granted, I don't want to botch this, and I read a little bit into it this morning. It was like the first thing I did when I woke up. Not the way I don't like negative stories when I first wake up, but it's the first thing I came across. It's something about Greg Brooks, who was a cornerback at Arkansas, transferred to LSU. I think he found out that he had brain cancer.
Oh my goodness.
I think, and he ended up having a bunch of strokes, and like he can't speak correctly, and all this stuff. But he's like, pretty much that happened in like 2023. Like, Brian Kelly or no one from LSU was like reached out at all to like be like, hey, we love you, whatever. It's almost like I've heard this about Brian Kelly when it comes to players and coaches. Like, he's not really the embrace, welcome him back and show all this appreciation. It's like when he's done using you, he's done. Which, granted, there's two sides to every story, but his dad and him were on Good Morning America, I think yesterday. And his dad was like, you can't even reach out to the kid and tell him that you love him. Like and that's not a good look at all.
No, it's not. That's why I was Harold Perkins, I know that there was some back and forth there too.
It just feels like with Brian Kelly, like he's just not known for being a very good dude. Now, I'm not saying Hugh Freeze is, but I feel like the LSU fan base, they're watching Notre Dame get to the national title with this other coach, and it's like that was kind of Brian Kelly could never get over the top, but having Notre Dame in these conversations and stuff pretty much every year, everybody thought great coach, one of the best coaches in college football. Marcus Freeman goes there and he's kind of doing the same thing. It's like maybe just Notre Dame being that independent with that type of schedule where you can kind of navigate and dictate a little bit more. Maybe it's not a Brian Kelly thing. And then you look at the results that Brian Kelly's having at LSU, and it's like, I think LSU fans are starting to figure out, okay, maybe this isn't our dude. So I would probably say because they're like if Auburn gets 4, I don't know what the expectations from Auburn fans will be, but I feel like that's really realistic, and I feel like that will probably be enough to have them feeling like things are on the upward swing.
Yeah.
If LSU's got to go like 10-2 and make the playoff.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's going to happen.
I think that LSU, the expectations are national title contention. And I think that they got a taste of that, obviously, in 2019. Now, arguably with the best college football team, some people say ever. But with Auburn, I think that, Hugh Freeze has brought a lot of life back into that program, especially after Brian Harsin and that whole debacle. So I think that what Hugh Freeze has done a good job of is recruiting. I mean, I have always said I would love to be a fly on the wall with those recruiting visits. The pitch that he gives must be incredible.
I have been. Yeah. Now granted, when he was at Lambeth, an NAIA school in Tennessee is when my senior year of high school. And I was down to Lambeth, or I ended up going to Birmingham Southern, but Hugh Freeze was the head coach, and I've spent well over an hour in his office with just him and my parents. And I will say, I tell people when Auburn hired him, I mean, I told Auburn fans, that I know and I'm friends with, like, I wanted to go play for the dude. That school was so run down. It shut down and I guess Birmingham Southern did too, but Birmingham Southern was a pretty nice campus and stuff. But Lambeth, it just seemed like it was, I don't know. I just had this gut feeling it's not going to be around here too much longer. But I mean, Hugh, I was like, I would love to play for this dude. Didn't know anything about backgrounds, we know the stories and all that stuff. Didn't know anything about that, but my personal experience, the guy can make a hell of a pitch.
Yeah. And I think that is where Auburn fans are really happy with, is that they have, and we mentioned it last season, they had a talented team.
More talented than 5 and 7.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I think obviously there was some quarterback woes, of course, and there were some kind of questionable decisions with how the Hank Brown, Peyton Thorne situation went about. That was interesting to me. But like when you look at their running back duo, Jarquez Hunter and Damari Alston, like they were solid players.
And then they just get away from running the football.
Right.
It was weird.
It was
some of those games.
Strange. And even their receivers stacked. Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think, he was super impressive. Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson. But it was so interesting watching those games because how my season works, for those that may not know, is I split my time between Auburn and Bama. And so I really do sit at 50-50. So 50% at Auburn, 50% covering Bama games. And I think this year was a little more Bama heavy just because of away games and how it worked out. But I got to see a lot of, those games, how they progressed. Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Georgia, they played closer than people may remember in that game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did.
And simultaneously, Alabama's at Vanderbilt. And it's like, I remember we were all sitting on that sideline and everyone had their phones up. And everyone, I think, I'm not kidding, everyone in that stadium was paying more attention to what was taking place in Nashville than what was taking place in front of them. And I remember going into post-game, and there's that like video of Lane Kiffin where he is totally not paying attention to anything that's happening. And he was like, wait a second, like this happens only once in a lifetime. And that was the same energy with Hugh Freeze. We were all kind of like, all right, who scored? What's the deal? But I say all of that because my takeaway from Auburn season was talented roster. The run game was great. Obviously, Peyton Thorne was rough at best. He had some flashes, but it was really Hugh Freeze and his, the play calling, because there's all that controversy with, the season before of who's going to be calling the plays and who does that fall on. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect out of Auburn. I really don't. I think
that's crucial for Bama
Yeah.
because like the good part about it is we'll know what to expect by the time the last game of the season rolls around. But going in, like you think, okay, 5-7 football team, you would expect, okay, that should be a pretty easy win. Like Auburn should improve, and everybody will admit, like, oh, Jordan Hare Stadium, Voodoo Stadium.
Yeah,
they like to call it
in general, for sure.
Yeah. So, a lot of people say, oh, that will be a tougher game than you would expect. But like when you're looking at it on a paper, on a schedule, you're like, that should be a win. Yeah. But it's like, we just don't, because I will say they have an influx of talent. They've really helped their offensive line, their receiving room. They've added a couple of really good receivers out of the transfer portal. Cam Coleman's going to be, now more of a seasoned vet who's got the experience. Yeah. We'll see what happens with Perry Thompson and his development. Yeah. Malcolm Simmons, like they got receivers. Yeah. The quarterback play, they can't get much worse as far as like back-breaking decision making. So I mean, you would expect improvement there. So like it could end up being like, I know a lot of fans when you're looking at the schedule and trying to figure out win totals and stuff, you get to the end of the year and it's like at Auburn, when I'm being really reluctant, is I have no idea how to play that game. Like I have no idea how to predict that game. Yeah. And so like to me, it's like probably should be a win, but I mean they haven't been very good the last 2 times Alabama's went to here, and it's taken a couple of really good plays. So that's an interesting one for sure.
Were you at 4th and 31? Were you at that game?
No.
I was there.
Were you? I will say that the reaction to the 2 sidelines, the videos that are like side by side, is one of the most amazing videos I've ever seen, because anybody that's in Auburn's position would have felt the same way. It was wild.
It was insane. I'll share the story and then we can move on to Florida and then wrap up. But behind me, so I was in the other end zone. I was in Auburn's end zone. So the play took place across the field. And behind me is a student section, and it started building and building. And at the top, near where that giant video board is, it was like empty rows because everyone was moving down. And I remember I looked at this photographer next to me, and I was like, I'm grabbing your arm and just going. And he was like, whatever you do not let go of my arm. He said, I'm going to the middle of the field to get the handshake, but you grab my arm. He said, I don't care if you trip. I don't care if you fall. You hold on to my elbow. And so like everyone behind us started getting closer and closer. And then 4th and 31 happened. And when I tell you, you could have heard a pin drop where I was, but down the field, you could hear all of that Alabama section. And it was such a weird, like, oh my goodness. It was insane. One of my favorite games I've ever covered, easily.
Well, I mean, it was going to voodoo and reversing the voodoo. Like it was, you don't see that too often.
No.
It working out in Alabama's favor.
Well, I grew up hearing the stories of the Iron Bowl, right? And like I remember, the clips and hearing, all of the lore, and experiencing it was crazy.
Yeah, it's a different rivalry. It's going to be fun. Now Florida, they're sitting at 6.5, and you do want to talk about that, and I don't blame you because that one kind of stood out to me too.
So based on last season, I thought, and I think we can all agree, those in the chat, Florida's schedule was insanity. And to me, they outperformed based on that schedule pretty intensely. I think that there was,
with the way they finished, for sure.
Yes, with the way they finished. So I was surprised to see 6.5. I think that I expect Florida to be better than that. And I think Florida fans expect them to be sitting at the 8-9 range. And I have the schedule pulled up too. Let me see. But I want to quickly run through this and just get some thoughts on it, because I think Florida is better than that 6.5 win total. They start things off LIU in Gainesville. They've got South Florida, which Alabama fans are familiar with them and their stadium, unfortunately. They've got LSU at LSU. They've got Miami at Miami. They've got Texas at home. They go to College Station for Texas A&M. Mississippi State comes to town in Gainesville. Then they've got neutral site, Georgia. They've got Kentucky at Kentucky, Ole Miss at Ole Miss, and then they round out with Tennessee at home and then Florida State at home.
That is really tough.
It is.
Stretch.
Yes.
Like, granted, like Georgia, Kentucky on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Tennessee, Florida State, we have no idea what. I mean, I think they're going to be better, but I'm not going to sit here and hype them up as being some really tough opponent when they're a 2-10 football team last year. But, and then really even before that, like, I mean, the 4-game stretch of LSU, Miami, Texas, and Texas A&M, with 3 of those 4 being on the road. I mean, granted, Miami's going to be, I say Miami being on the road, it's Hard Rock.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be like a significant advantage for Miami, if an advantage at all. So I mean, even still, like Baton Rouge, Miami.
The more I look
Texas,
at this,
College Station,
I get of these 6.5 wins if going over.
Well, I mean, I kind of am thinking, granted, I think Florida's going to be much improved. They're one of the teams I look at the schedule, and I think it's going to be tough, but I still have a hard time with 6.5. I will say I'm going to get some people in trouble. Probably, please be smart about this, but get over to mybookie.ag, and if they got some futures on Alabama win total, go over 8.5. I feel pretty good about that. I really do. I think there's too much that's going to be going right. There's question marks, some spots. I think the fact that Vegas is unsure about the quarterback situation, like it's like some things that are affecting that that really shouldn't. 9-3 is possible. 8-4, I cannot see it. So that in Florida, 6.5 wins. I don't see 6 losses on the schedule, despite the fact that I think it's a really tough schedule. Like you can go 7-5. You can drop Georgia. You can drop Ole Miss. You can drop Tennessee. You can drop A&M. You can drop Texas. Just beat like LSU, or and I say it doesn't have to be LSU. LSU can be one of those losses, but like LSU, A&M, Ole Miss, Tennessee, like get one win there, and I think you're sitting at 7-5, maybe 2 wins. You're sitting at 7-5 at least.
Do you think Billy Napier still gets the boot if they're 7-5?
Yes, and it's because they're expecting improvement, significant improvement. Like this is a pretty good Florida roster. You got probably the best quarterback in college football, or one of them.
Yeah.
In DJ Lagway, who's now got a kind of a year of experience. I just don't see a situation where he survives. So I think 8-4 is kind of the floor as far as his survival, and even then, I don't know. I would say if you go 8-4, it's like you getting DJ Lagway back for one more year, as long as he continues to do some of the good things on the recruiting trail and get some of that going. 8-4 probably is absolute bare minimum. 7-5 is not going to do it. 6-6 damn sure ain't going to do it. I know, we'll see.
Okay. Well, I think that's going to round us out. This was great conversation. We appreciate everyone in the chat. I love videos like this. I feel like we can kind of go more into the weeds. So let us know if you like this kind of style where we're breaking down the SEC holistically, and we can do other conferences as well. Not opposed to that, but we want to make sure that we're giving you guys content that you want to consume and that you enjoy and you find interesting. So Clint, where can they find us to, as Stacey said, keep these conversations going?
Yeah. Before I get to that, I do want to, because Ryan had asked that question, and I totally, we got, sidetracked. But so he's essentially saying you're spending more money on coordinator, less for NIL. I don't think it's the same pipeline. You're not going to like donors and stuff and saying, hey, can we get money to go get a coordinator? Now, granted, you are having to go to donors sometimes and getting buyout money, because it's like coming up with the millions up front that you got to pay somebody. That's a little different. I just don't know. I don't think that's really affecting things. I don't think what I'm telling you is I don't think they pulled money out of the NIL fund to pay to get Ryan Grubb. Now, what I will say is you gave Nick Sheridan quite a handsome raise, elevating him to offensive coordinator last year. Like he came in with one salary, and just a short period later, it got bumped up. And I don't think you take away his pay. So you're probably paying him whatever he's doing, probably more than you probably should. But you're also keeping him on staff, and there's that continuity factor. So, but once again, I don't think it's really affecting the NIL side of things. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. Covercrimson.com. we're talking about all these things as far as win totals, as far as, coaching rankings and all that stuff. We also got the YouTube channel here where we're going to be, Mick and I a little bit later this evening, where we're going to be talking into some recruiting stuff. I've been watching a lot of the 2026 tape, and there's some like must gets for Alabama that we're going to be talking about tonight. So be on the lookout. We'll be going live to where you can hop in the comments and do all that. Also, mybookie.ag, get on over there, sign up, use the promo code next round. That's really important. There Super Bowls this weekend. If you haven't already, go place a small wager.
Yeah.
And then also, like I said, take advantage of some of those futures. I think right now Vegas is underselling a couple of teams, and I think Alabama's one of them. So it should be fun. Mybookie.ag.
Mybookie.ag. I did come in 4th place poker on Monday night in the money
Okay.
bubble, so we'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah, they out of what, 12 people did you say?
12 people. Yeah.
And that's final table stuff.
Final table and the paid out. So I'm sitting good season standings wise. Like I'm in a pretty comfortable spot, which
winning certainly helps.
Right.
With that. But if more final tables you make,
exactly.
Tough to lose money when you're doing that.
A little cash coming in does not hurt either. So yeah, I'll keep you guys updated. We're going to be live again on Friday, 9:30 a.m. Central. And we can, let us know what you guys want to chat about and kind of have us go in depth with, because again, we love doing this. And you can find even more at covercrimson.com. Join the message boards, join in. We have a lot of fun over there. We'd love for you to join us. So make sure you head back here 9:30 a.m. Central on Friday, and we'll continue to chat.